Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays, hosted by someone's favorite film buff, Nathan. I love movies and I want to share that with you. From old originals to cult classics and foreign favorites, along with straight up drivel, WWW is your place for all things movies. Stick around and we'll leave you with a movie to watch over the weekend with your family or that special someone. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Wednesdays, the show where we talk about 3 movies all in the same night. Very quickly, before we get into any prelude, if I sound a bit slower tonight and maybe sound like I'm recovering from a cold, it's because I am. But the show must go on, and the show will indeed continue to go on, because tonight is a very important episode. Tonight is not only the last episode of the winter quarter, but also an episode that I've been anticipating doing for quite a while now. I figured I'd have to do it eventually. The 3 movies we're talking about tonight are from one of the most legendary directors of all time, one of the most legendary actors of all time, one of the most legendary writers of all time, and one of the most legendary radio hosts of all time. Yes, all 4 of those signifiers fall onto one singular person, and these three movies that we're talking about tonight were all directed by him and feature him as an actor. For those of you who don't know who I'm talking about quite yet, let me narrow it down. Have you heard of a movie called Citizen Kane? If you haven't, yes you have. It's the movie where the guy says Rosebud. You know, the black and white movie where the guy says Rosebud? Oh, you'll know it when I start talking about it. Don't worry about it. It's going to be our first movie on the watch list tonight. That being Citizen Kane from 1941, Touch of Evil from 1958, and The Trial from 1962, rounding out our watch list. And in case I haven't made myself perfectly clear yet, and you don't even recognize the name, let me just clarify it for you. The person we're talking about tonight is Orson Welles. You probably recognize that name. But if you haven't heard that name before, you've heard of Citizen Kane. And it'll be the first movie we talk about after the break. So stick around for that. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our first movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Citizen Kane from 1941, available to rent from places such as YouTube, Amazon, and Fandango at home. For the basic plot summary of Citizen Kane, we follow Charles Foster Kane. Hey, the movie's called Citizen Kane, and it's about a guy with the last name Kane. Coincidence? No, absolutely not a coincidence. Anyways, Charles Foster Kane, a wealthy newspaper tycoon, dies in his mansion during the first 2 minutes of Citizen Kane. That's the scene I was talking about earlier, you know, he says Rosebud, he drops the snow globe. He's dead now. Wonderful. That's how we start our movie. Off to a rip-roaring adventure. Essentially, after Charles Foster Kane dies, there is a reporter who works for a news agency, a man who is named Thompson, and Thompson is given the assignment to go interview people from Charles Foster Kane's life. He is meant to interview them and ask them about the meaning of his last word, Rosebud. What could that possibly mean to both Kane and the people who knew him in his life? Quite a setup there. It's interesting that our supposed main character dies in the first 2 minutes. How could it possibly be interesting after that? Well, let me let you in on a little secret. It's interesting for many more ways than just one, if I'm being honest with you, because Citizen Kane is often called one of the best movies ever made. And when I say that, I don't mean just one of the best movies ever made. Sometimes it's even referred to as the best movie ever made. As in the end-all, be-all, best movie ever made. And you don't get to be called the best movie ever made without being interesting. Let me tell you that much. That much is for sure. And you gotta be interesting in more than just one way to be called the best movie of all time. As much as I've said that already, let me kind of start off by letting you in on my own personal little take on Citizen Kane. And it's probably not going to be very controversial because a lot of people have probably already said it before. I, in my opinion, do not think that Citizen Kane is the best movie of all time. Whoa, shocker. It's almost like everybody who's salty and incredibly, it kind of just nitpicky or a snob or a complete, I don't even know. What's the practical hippie, punk, loser, bozo who just wants to go against pop culture will tell you that Citizen Kane is not the best movie of all time. Don't mistake me for one of those people. I don't look at Citizen Kane with that angle of just saying it's not the best movie ever made just to say that for the sake of it. I say this more so from the perspective of, this will sound snobby, but I personally don't think that you can really narrow down the vast array of films out there, the vast experience of making cinema as a whole, down to just one single best attempt at it. I don't think there is one end-all, be-all best movie of all time. But I do think that I do understand why Citizen Kane is often called the number one. And I think in the running up to find the best one of all time, Citizen Kane deserves to be there alongside things like The Godfather and Shawshank Redemption, right? It deserves to be in the running, for sure, absolutely. Don't ever think people who, the reason I'm not going to call it not the best movie of all time, and I want to avoid being in the camp of people who just say that, is because then people will go on and say that it's not even a good movie. And it's like, no, it's a good movie. It's a very good movie. It's an extremely good movie. And let's talk about exactly why that is. First of all, I've already explained the plot to you, but do you realize how revolutionary but also fresh the idea of this story is? Having your main character die in the first 2 minutes, and then following a completely unrelated character, exploring the entire backstory of our main character throughout flashbacks told by people who were close to him in his life. That right there is an interesting idea for a movie. As much as it doesn't sound like it, it is an interesting setup. And on the very basis of it, at its core, it doesn't lose sight of having that hook to keep the audience engaged. Thompson is going around trying to find about what the meaning of Rosebud is. He's got a tangible goal in mind. So it has that going for it. Despite what could possibly be seen as a boring idea for a story, it still has the basic elements of what's the hook, what's our goal, what are we building to, what's in the way of it, and what tends to be in the way of it is the people he goes and talks to might not know what Rosebud means. Multiple people haven't figured it out. People around the world know that Charles Foster Kane is dead, and they don't know what Rosebud means. So what if the people who knew him throughout his life don't know what it means either? There's a very good chance of that. And in case you haven't seen the movie, I'm not going to spoil the results of it. But for those of you who have seen it, you know exactly why I bring that up. At any rate, I should also mention very quickly that the cinematography is amazing, and the music is amazing, and the acting is amazing, and the pacing is amazing, and the editing is amazing, and the audio is fine. I will say nearly everything about it. Set design is amazing, and the lighting is amazing, and the music is really good, and the sound is fine. For all of my praises, I will admit that the audio in Citizen Kane, and I mean more so, not even the way the dialogue is delivered, just somehow the way the dialogue can sometimes be a bit staggered and maybe a bit delayed and very clearly overdubbed, is a lot more noticeable than I thought it would be. And that kind of detracts from the experience just a smidge. Just a smidge. I will admit, it was difficult to not notice that sometimes. But for the fact that I can watch a movie from 1941, nearly 84 years later, and go, I've never seen cinematography like that before, and I love the editing of that, and some of this pacing is out of this world. Why am I not being bored by the fact that I'm just watching an old guy talk about his friend and just reveal the great mysteries of life? Why does this not feel pretentious? Why does this not feel pandering in any way, shape, or form? How am I still entertained by just watching a guy walk around and ask, hey, what does Rosebud mean? The fact that I had that experience with the movie is insane, but also a testament to me standing here and saying, yes, Citizen Kane deserves to be called one of the greatest movies of all time. It deserves that placement. If for the story idea alone, or for just the cinematography, or for just one or two of the shots that exist in it, let me tell you how many times, well, not let me tell you, but I will assure you that if you go into any form of film education, you will see parts of this movie over and over again. It is referenced constantly. And after rewatching it, I can say I actually fully understand it. One movie I wish we did reference more often, though, is our next movie on the watch list, that being Touch of Evil. So stick around for that. 88 won the Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our second movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Touch of Evil from 1958, available to watch now on Amazon Prime with a subscription. For the basic plot summary of Touch of Evil, we follow Miguel Vargas, a Mexican cop, and Hank Quinlan, an American cop, as they butt heads during an investigation concerning a car bombing near the Mexican-American border. Oh, that sounds rather safe, doesn't it? No. Especially when Vargas thinks that there's something fishy about Quaylen and starts digging. I'm sure that doesn't result in any negative consequences for Vargas whatsoever. I'm sure that Quaylen is definitely not a senior officer in his police precinct and doesn't have the ways of making Vargas's life a nightmare. Not at all. Foreshadowing much? Yes, I do quite a lot of it, but I think there's something to be said for how funny it can be to just kind of over foreshadow something. But we got to talk about something that's not super funny very quickly before we jump into any more about Touch of Evil. I should mention that Miguel Vargas is a Mexican cop in Touch of Evil, but he is played by Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston is not Mexican. That is kind of a difficult pill to swallow, especially considering after watching Touch of Evil, I would honestly say that it is my new favorite noir movie. Unfortunately, it does have that one kind of caveat to it. But aside from that, I find it extremely interesting that after sitting down and finally watching Touch of Evil, after wanting to watch it for so very long, I realized, hey, it's been a long time since I've watched a noir movie, a proper noir movie from the 50s or the 40s, whatever. A long time since I've properly sat down and watched this genre. And I can honestly say that as a reintroduction to the genre, I almost said theme for some reason, to the genre, I will say Touch of Evil is an absolutely amazing entry in the film noir genre, and probably my new favorite entry in the genre. And it's going up against things like The Maltese Falcon and Double Indemnity. The fact that it's able to hold its own in the ring against those two specifically is amazing, but also partially unsurprising considering how good of a movie it really is. Again, I should mention that after Citizen Kane, after I went on about the cinematography, it's surprising to say it again, but I will say it once more. The cinematography in Touch of Evil is out of this world. I know that it can always come down to a good cinematographer, which will make good cinematography. But after seeing the stylistic choices between the two movies, I gotta admit, I'm starting to lean towards it being just a thing about Orson Welles. The way he controls the camera, the way it moves, both up and down as well as back and forth at the same time, depending on the shot it is, the way it punches in on stuff, the way you can leave it rolling for so long, and the amount of coordination it takes to get all of the actors to perform at their absolute best while the camera is just going and going with such long takes. It's out of this world. It is unbelievable, unimaginable to see it so many years later. Again, 1958. Wow. Way more than 50 years after the fact. Okay, maybe not. Well, yes, close enough to 70 at this point. And yet, it works unimaginably well. Crazy to me. I will also say that, interestingly speaking, I will say that the pacing in Citizen Kane was amazing. But in the case of Touch of Evil, it kind of had a problem with its pacing. It felt a bit awkward. Or at least it could have been seen as a problem at first. When I was watching the movie, I kind of got lost. I kind of got a bit distracted having to follow so many different other arcs and different characters being thrown into the mix. Because, of course, I've mentioned Miguel Vargas and Hank Quaylen, but there's multiple other characters, multiple other storylines that kind of converge all across each other and intercut in between each other, that it kind of becomes a chore having to follow along with all of it. And at first I was thinking and sitting there going to myself, I'm a bit confused. What's going on here? I'm having trouble following along. As the movie went on, I realized, hey, this isn't as much of a negative as I thought it was. Because, weirdly enough, the way it works is it essentially throws almost everything at you in the beginning, right? And if you're able to at least process half of that information and kind of just go from there, you might be able to piece it together later. That's what Wells does best, I believe, is he throws it all out for you, and then the rest of the movie is spent laying the groundwork with the stuff he's thrown at you. It's essentially the equivalent, the movie equivalent of a carpenter throwing multiple planks of wood at you and multiple other pieces of wood at you, and then going, okay, we're gonna build a really good staircase with this wood. Let's figure it out now that all of it is now laying in the mud and I've thrown it on top of you. And one of them is kind of squishing you underneath the mud there. You good, buddy? It's an interesting analogy, but I think it applies to Touch of Evil the most out of the three that we talk about tonight, because especially at the end, specifically at the end, if anything, I will admit that as confused as I was throughout most of the movie, when it came time for you to get that final confrontation, and I won't get too into detail about it, but when you get to that final confrontation, there was something about that scene specifically, realizing all of the things that were brought up beforehand and seeing them in action, watching it all click into place, something about it was extremely magical. It took off in a way I wasn't expecting. It made me feel a certain way that I wasn't expecting to feel while watching the movie. It was this undeniable feeling, this undeniable experience that I was watching the movie while it happened. That sounds so very generic, but what I mean is, if you had put me in the movie itself, if I was existing within it, I wouldn't have been watching a movie. I would have been watching a story take place. Cinematic genius, transporting your audience directly into the world that your characters inhabit and having them experience what your characters are experiencing, almost exclusively. That is what Touch of Evil achieves, and I will admit that Citizen Kane did it better, but the fact that I was able to go on about it for so long with Touch of Evil speaks highly to how it still is able to pull it off almost as well. So keep that in mind. And especially keep that in mind when we talk about the third and final movie on our watch list and for Winter Quarter, that being The Trial. So stick around for that. Your Movie Central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our third and final movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at The Trial from 1962, available to watch now on Tubi. For the basic plot summary of The Trial, we follow a man by the name of Joseph K. as he is placed under arrest in his home. But he is then not taken to prison. Instead, he's just asked a bunch of pedantic questions by these guys he calls cops, but they don't have police badges, and then he's said, oh, you're gonna go to trial and you're gonna go to interrogation. And so he has to go get legal advice from a guy called the Advocate, who is played by Orson Welles. And the Advocate doesn't really do anything to help him, but he doesn't do anything against him. But then K, as he's just called Mr. K, more often than Joseph. Mr. K then throws a fit that he's not doing anything against him either, but he's not doing anything to help. And then it's just this long string of things happening. And most importantly, Joseph K keeps asking what he was charged for, what his crime was, and he's never told what his crime was. Okay, so let me back up a minute here. The trial is probably the most interesting one to end off the night and the quarter with. I'm gonna be fully honest with you. I don't think I fully understand it. I did get something out of it for sure, and I'll say that for later in the review. But to say that the trial is abstract and a bit difficult to kind of follow along with, and very artsy, all three of those things are complete understatements on what an experience the trial is. It is quite a trial to watch it, I'll tell you that much. Not because it's hard to watch, more so because it's difficult cerebrally, right? It's difficult kind of philosophically, difficult from a story perspective to really understand what it's getting at and what it's really kind of hidden underneath the fingernail, if you could call it that. I feel like that kind of analogy is applicable to something like this. It's not going to be understood in one sitting or one viewing, that's for sure. But after one viewing, I at least did get something out of it. I will admit that the trial is probably the least annoying portrayal of a stress dream I have ever seen in a movie. You know how there's Alice in Wonderland, and then there was things like Apocalypse Now or Megalopolis from last year, or you've got things like Requiem for a Dream, or you got a lot of different things out there. Like Inception would be another good example, right? Movies that intentionally or unintentionally feel like a dream in some facet of the way that they conduct themselves, right? They all feel like a dream in some way, shape, or form. And that kind of thing of feeling like a dream, or it was all a dream, is a very common cliche in movies at this point. I mean, even The Matrix did it, right? It's a common theme. But the trial, weirdly enough, feels like that without it needing to put that as a tagline, right? It feels like an extremely high-level stress dream. I will say, at the beginning, it kind of sets it up as a dream, but it's never confirmed to be one big dream, and it doesn't really need to harp on the fact. It just kind of feels like you're stuck in this endless loop of not getting anywhere, but it feels so very intentional and well-crafted that I'm not annoyed by it. I need to clarify this as much as I can, because as bad as this sounds on paper as an experience, the one emotion I didn't feel while watching the trial was annoyance, weirdly enough. Not even from the perspective of something like Eraserhead, where I was pretty annoyed while watching it. And I know I'll get flack for that. Don't worry about it. Sometimes a movie that feels like a dream can be an annoying quirk of it. Sometimes it can be an artistic strength. In the case of the trial, it feels like an artistic strength for it to be an annoyance, right? So you're following me here. It feels like the artistic strength, even though it's attempting to be an annoyance, and it works itself around to still being more an artistic strength than annoyance. It's an interesting thought experiment, but I can definitely tell you that I say this with full confidence, knowing that on the surface, I think most of the reason I was able to sit through it and not be annoyed is because Anthony Perkins was the main character of the movie. For those of you who have never heard of Anthony Perkins, he is the one who played Norman Bates in Psycho. I have now just realized after watching the trial that I would watch Anthony Perkins in literally anything. He could be eating a fish for 4.5 hours, and I would watch every second of it. I was painfully unaware of how much I love Anthony Perkins as an actor until I sat down and watched the trial, and I can fully admit it. Even in a movie where nothing ends up going anywhere, Anthony Perkins kills the role 110%. Absolutely smashes it. If you're any fan of Anthony Perkins, highly recommend watching the trial. You'll love it 100%. I will say, for all of its confusing ideals and its almost dedication to being frustrating, the trial never does feel like that, and it also never feels extremely pretentious. For being a movie, again, that feels like a dream, it doesn't have this pretentious angle to it. It feels like Orson Welles, again, being director and co-writer of it, and the actor who plays the advocate, an actor in the movie. It feels like he's constantly reaching out, trying to get you to understand what he's trying to say to you. It's more of a holistic approach of reaching out to the audience and asking them, hey, do you get it yet? Or do you need me to explain it for you? I won't explain it for you, but do you get it now? Of course, why would you ask to explain it for me if you're not going to explain it? But, I mean, it's better than saying, I'm not going to explain it to you. You need to figure it out for yourself. The tone of voice is just slightly different, and it's just asking if you understand it yet, if you've figured it out for yourself yet. And that's an interesting approach to take to it. I will also say that at the end of it all, I may not fully understand it, but I definitely at least got one thing out of the trial. I think at its core, on the first watch, it is trying to communicate the point that sometimes in life you are stuck in a point where you cannot regress or go back or escape. But sometimes you're kind of in the middle as well, where you can't really progress either. You're kind of just stuck there, and you're not really going to win, but you're not really going to lose either. That's kind of what my winter quarter has felt like. But I can definitely guarantee this, one thing that will not regress and will absolutely continue and progress will be What to Watch Wednesdays. After we get back from spring break, going into spring quarter, we will definitely continue What to Watch Wednesdays, just not next week or the week after that. So, with that being said, thank you all for listening in to What to Watch Wednesdays. I will be back on What to Watch Wednesdays in the foreseeable future. I believe 2 or 3 weeks out is when the next show is. I don't know. I haven't looked at the calendar specifically, but you'll all know. And if you want a direct way to know when the next show is going to be sure to follow along What to Watch Wednesdays on both Instagram and YouTube. That being at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces, on both Instagram and YouTube. It'll be on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Whatever date that is whatever date it will be. But for our actual final episode of the quarter that you'll be hearing me here on 88.1 The Burg, you can tune in to What to Watch Weekends this Saturday from 8 to 10 p.m. In theory, maybe 8 to 9 p.m. We'll see how long it lasts, where I'll hopefully be talking about another Orson Welles movie, that being The Other Side of the Wind, and his famous War of the Worlds radio broadcast to close out winter quarter, officially speaking. This will just be the last What to Watch Wednesdays, and speaking of that, again, thank you for listening to What to Watch Wednesdays for all of winter quarter, and especially tonight. I'll be on in spring quarter telling you all what to watch. Good night, everybody.